most people don't beat the market, but that's where I consider, doing these individual bets. So like if you want to buy individual stocks, I would consider that medium risk. I think it's a personal choice how much you put in high risk. You can put 0 in high risk, and that's great. Or you can put, 50% in high risk, and that's also, it ends up being a very personal perspective. Crypto is definitely high risk.
Today I have with me Mircea Pașoi. He's a good friend and also a crypto enthusiast and technology expert. So there are so many things I can tell you about Mircea, but I would like just to highlight a few of the things that I know about him. Maybe he can add a few more to it. So one is that as a child, he won several international competitions in informatics. And then he moved on to, of course, starting his own company that was acquired by Twitter, right, Mircea? And then moving on to the crypto world, he started working for Coinbase. That just got listed recently. And now he's working for Novi Financial, which is actually a branch and a subsidiary of Facebook. And he's an engineering manager there, but I know that Facebook is downplaying the role names. It's a company policy, so he's quite the guy at Novi when it comes to engineering, security, and maybe he'll tell you more about it. So welcome, Mircea. Thank you for joining me tonight. Again, we have a Clubhouse session running in parallel, so I think I hope everything will be all right on that side too. Maybe we can pick up some questions later on. And please tell me, what did I miss about yourself? I mean, it's impressive what you've done so far. You seem young.
Thanks, Sebastian. I mean, I think that's a good intro. Like, appreciate all the kind words and everything you mentioned. I mean, I think that's a good summary of like, I'm an engineer basically. That's like at the core. Like, I'm a builder. Build software. Did that like since I was a kid. Either through programming competitions, and then last decade has been mostly in the industry. So worked on social media, and then now crypto. Very exciting things happening in those spaces. And now the last few years have been all about blockchain and crypto for me. Got interested in it in 2017. It felt like I was late, but with hindsight, it's actually early.
It's still early today, I guess.
Even today it's pretty early. So perspective helps. And I think that's actually how we met. I remember when I was getting into blockchain, I was like, are there any people in Romania? Because like I live in the US now. I've been in the US for almost 10 years. So I was like, do I know anybody in Romania who is interested in blockchain? And I think you were the first person that showed up on my LinkedIn, and I was like, oh yeah, let me talk to him. And I think since then we've kept in touch, quite frequently.
So thank you for joining the show, and I hope it will be interesting for our viewers and listeners to get some insights from someone that's been recently, for the last 4 years. It's quite recent if you think about 2009 journey on blockchain and Bitcoin, but at the same time you've had some major contributions to the space, working for Coinbase, and not only, and now working for Novi, and also being an enthusiast. I mean, every time I've met you, I know we've had some nice conversations around a lot of topics, but crypto came up quite often. So, but before that, I would like to ask you a few questions on your journey as an entrepreneur, just as a very short summary, because people might be interested on how to make it. You're the great example and a good example on how to make it, how to start it scrappy, as you like to say it, and then moving on to bigger things, and you got acquired by Twitter, right? And then moving to Coinbase. And how was your entrepreneurial journey? Just in a few sentences, because I think it might be inspiring for some of our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it was a lot of fun, and to be a startup founder, it was also super, super hard. Probably, definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. Very just like the stress, the challenges, but you also learn a lot. So that's where the fun comes. Yeah, and it's I didn't learn anything about business in school in Romania, so it was super hard to just understand business, marketing, sales, a lot of things that matter in a company that like coming from an engineering background. My initial thinking was like, oh, you just build a product, but then you face reality and realize it's not that simple. So yeah, it was fun and challenging.
Raising money, getting the product done.
Fundraising, yeah, all of that.
So how did you make it? Just as I don't know, in a nutshell.
I think persistence. It was hard to give up. So like my journey was pretty windy. Like I started in Romania, then got into an incubator in Canada. And like Canada, we chose because of immigration reasons. It was easier to move to Canada. So we lived in Canada for a while, tried to find money there. It was pretty hard in Canada as well. And then, kept building the product, kept talking to people. So never giving up. So we would get a lot of rejections, a lot of, just the setbacks. We even lost. So we started with 3 co-founders. Lost one of them along the way. So like a lot of stuff happens in a startup that's not according to plan. And then, we just kept at it. I mean, kept building the product, kept talking to users. And along the way, a lot of people from Twitter were early customers of the product. So they at some point reached out and said, hey, we want to buy the product and everything you've built.
That's a very good place to be in.
Yeah.
For your customers to ask, shut up and take my money.
Yeah. It was. So our initial product was free, but the fact that they were using it and they wanted to, basically buy the company was really great for us. Initially we didn't even know what it means and how do you do that. But thanks to lawyers and advisors and. Again, everything I've done, like maybe that's worth highlighting, is like usually through the help of others, or like that's what makes the difference. I think just the network of people that you can build, in Canada and even here in the US is just like a lot of people.
Where are you based now?
Helping me out along the way.
Where are you based now?
Now I live in San Francisco. So once Twitter bought our company, I moved to San Francisco, and I've been in San Francisco for 9 years now.
All right, awesome. I know I've visited you there, and it used to be fun. I hope it's gonna still be there. Nowadays, I see Texas is moving pretty fast, and Miami seems sexier.
Yeah. I mean, according to Twitter, I might be the only person left in San Francisco. So it's,
all of your friends moved out. Miami, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Miami, Texas. I'm seeing, on Twitter, I think it looks very active, but yeah, I mean, Twitter is not the real life.
Are the streets empty? No entrepreneurs left. I've seen Jason Calacanis is still there, so there are a few people left, right? Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, there's still a lot of people.
There's hope left.
San Francisco. Yeah.
Sure. So moving on to the first topic, I would like to highlight again the fact that you've been working on security and on authentication and all of the cool stuff from from the geek perspective that happened in a crypto company. So what can you tell us on what you've worked on, if it's not a secret, and maybe some of the takeaways there. So let's start with what you've been in charge of at Coinbase in terms of security and how things maybe evolved.
Yeah, for sure. So let me think a bit. So like the main things I worked on when I was there, just at a high level. So around account security, which you mentioned, was just in general improving our two-factor authentication. So most websites or every web application has a lot of security concerns, and for Coinbase, that's like existential risk. So it's like, if you can get into somebody's account, you can steal crypto. That's really bad. It's hard to reverse. And the main thing we were focused on, how do you get more people to be secure? So like two-factor auth is the main method there. So we basically added support for security keys, which was for our highest value customers. So like, let's see, if you had $100,000 of crypto or more, I think like getting a security key on your account is probably the best approach you can do, just because it's like a hardware token. YubiKey is the main company that makes it. Google makes one as well. So like we added that to the product, and like it was very useful. Another thing I worked on was in general like country expansion. So like Europe, expanding to Europe actually, which was super hard, just figuring out, because unlike the US,
Regulations
Europe is very fragmented.
So it was difficult to expand to Europe because of regulations or because of customer?
Mostly due to fragmentation. So like when we looked at, so in the US, when we had to set up the sign up, you do it pretty much once for the whole of the US. I mean, there's some edge cases with the New York, or Hawaii was another one, but it's like pretty much all of the US. But then in Europe, when I worked on expanding to Europe, it's like, okay, UK does it this way, and then Germany has this other thing that you're supposed to look at, and then in Romania, for example, we ask for like CNP, like the numerical code, but that's like a very Romanian specific thing when you sign up.
Well, you have social security number in the US also, so it's kind of a social security number.
Yeah, but there's subtle differences. That's the thing. So like once you start exploring the space, is like every country has subtle differences, and especially Europe has a lot of these little differences. And then the ID documents are all different. So like, ID documents in Romania, for example, they don't have anything on the back. So that's, like you need to take that into account. Just lots of little details like that. But yeah, Europe expansion was a big one. It was just shocking how different or how fragmented it is compared to the US. Whereas like, you kind of do it once and it works for 300 million people.
That's an interesting view on things. I would have never thought about it. I mean, yeah, you're right. It makes sense that things might get a lot of complexity when you start to implement it and try to be compliant at the same time, right?
Yeah, compliance and was a big thing, right? Like for example, in Spain, I think they have 2 last names. That's common. So then you need to change all your systems to support that. How do you capture 2 last names? And there's like, I don't remember all the details. I just remember it was like pretty much country by country, as opposed to saying, oh, Europe, which is how most people in America think about Europe, just like a big area that it's, you just kind of like the US, ocean. But not really.
Sure. So are there any takeaways for our listeners and for our viewers that you might want to highlight? I mean, is there anything obvious that people should be aware of? And I'm not talking about common sense things like don't lose and don't write your password on a napkin and stuff like that, or use two-factor authentication. Is there anything that you might want to tell people, and how should they protect their assets, especially if they're working with exchange?
Yeah, I mean, I know. So you said it's basic, but I still think it's super important, the two-factor stuff. Like when we, like Coinbase had when I was there, 30 million people. It's now 50 million plus. The majority were on SMS, which has a bunch of attack vectors. So like SIM swapping is pretty common. So like good two-factor authentication is actually, my impression is still not done enough by most people, and like I think it's worthwhile on the internet, on any service. And just how
did you explore biometrics by any chance?
Biometric. We had the biometrics on the mobile app. So when you use the mobile app, you can use Face ID or Touch ID, stuff like that.
So
Yeah, so
I remember reading
that also
about
helps.
a high profile case where some people got via SIM swap, of course, got hacked and got their funds out. So what I would take away from what you just said, and it's a common practice, is to use a hardware two-way factor authentication. Is that right? That would be the safest way nowadays. Is there I don't know a way to multi-sig, maybe to use multi-sig? Is that a thing that could be?
I don't know about. I mean, I'm sure there's ways. I haven't looked into that per se. But yeah, like at least using some kind of non-SMS method, I think that goes a long way. Google Authenticator, 1Password has it. A lot of software has it nowadays. That helps. Yeah, and just like security, how important it was. I mean, that's what Coinbase did extremely well. General security best practices and implementation. Yeah, I think it's very important for crypto. And I like it's it's a fascinating area for anybody who's interested in engineering. I think it's a fascinating area. Still underrated, I think.
What about from the security side? What's your opinion on 51% attacks? Or I know this example with Ethereum Classic where they usually get hacked every few months or so. How were you thinking, or how are you thinking on this type of security issues? Is that a threat, existential threat to the crypto space in general? Is it not? How are things evolving from the security standpoint? I'm thinking about proof of stake versus proof of work and how difficult it is nowadays or would be in the future, because everyone talks about quantum computing, right? And the threat to blockchains. How is this a threat? Is it still a threat for major cryptocurrencies or not to have an attack on the network and then to lose your funds due to that?
It's a good question. I mean, so like I mostly read up on this stuff. Is like I just read what people research. But as my sense is like for the bigger projects, it's not really a problem. Like Bitcoin, Ethereum, those are big enough that it's harder to have these attacks. I mean, obviously for the smaller ones, it can be a problem. And there's been examples in the past. So yeah, that's like I don't really worry about it for the things that actually have a lot of usage or actual transactions and volume and all of that. The shadier stuff, like I would be skeptical. I try to avoid. So like I try to be fairly careful about which projects I look at and focus on. So that's my general. And then the quantum thing, I think my interpretation of everything I've read is that it's not really a problem. Like as in, even if it happens, there's ways to update the hashing such that it's it's quantum resistant. So like it feels like it's like the climate thing that people keep complaining about. It's more like a narrative than as in is like on the climate side. I think there's many arguments to that would say that something like proof of work actually helps with the a more efficient energy market, because it happens in places where they don't have like they would waste the energy otherwise. So it's like it's a good use, and there's market forces at play. So yeah, like
so it's more like a political view on things than a real threat, right? On the quantum computing side. Also, I heard that when the quantum computing will be advanced enough so that we can break, let's say, Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin will be the least of our problems. There are more critical infrastructure things that would fall apart before that. So that's also a valid point, I guess. Okay, then how about DeFi and the security risks in there? So about the major rug pulls that came along, but also the contracts, the smart contracts flaws that we keep hearing about. Do you have an opinion on that, and what's your take on it?
I mean, I've built smart contracts in the past, and at least on Ethereum, yeah, it's very different than regular software development. That's my initial thought on it. As in, it's more, like you put something out there, you cannot take it back. It's not like a web app. I mean, there are some upgrading paths, but it is significantly harder. So from a technical perspective, it's more like it felt more like you're doing hardware than software. So given that, I mean, I don't think we've seen the peak in terms of exploits and hacks. I mean, it's just like
The
a
worst
very
is
new
yet to
field.
come.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, and I mean, we fundamentally don't know. Like as more people put more money into these things and there's more attention, I think it's very likely that there will be some really big exploits. But that's how we get better. I mean, it's part of evolution in some
And
ways,
getting
right?
resilient
Like
and
financial markets.
anti-fragile, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that's my sense, is like it's gonna get more
Worse.
intense in the future.
Before it gets better, it should get worse.
Yeah.
And okay, how about the $5 ranch attack? How can anyone protect himself or herself from that? I come back at multisig. Is that maybe an option?
I mean, multi-sig is definitely interesting. I haven't looked to see what's like what are the best solutions out there.
I know there's Casa Hodl, these guys.
Yeah, I've heard of them. I just haven't used them. So I don't. It might be really good. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. But from a theoretical standpoint, besides multisig, is there any way, and hardware authentication, right, two-factor? How could anyone protect themselves from a $5 ranch attack?
Maybe to not broadcast their, like I think just maybe they don't go on Clubhouse talking about crypto. I don't know. Like I think like it's good to be somewhat multi-layered in your security, right? Like you want to have multiple layers of security. I think trying not to tell people, hey, I have a lot of crypto, that's a start. And like building a public persona around that, I do think that probably warrants increased security. Like if I were like actively speaking about this stuff, I would look into how can I make sure I have some form of private security or just like extra security, because yeah, you never know. I mean, the world is full of just all kinds of people.
Right, and greed is something also that might interfere with people's interest. But I was just curious on, let's say, technical perspective, if there are any other ways than what we've just mentioned here. So thank you for your input, and of course it's okay. Just as a disclaimer, Mircea and myself, we don't have any crypto whatsoever. So
exactly.
Then moving to more theoretical things, let's say, there's this narrative that crypto is used for money laundering. And you've seen a lot, and I'm not asking you to tell us anything from the backstage or anything you are not at liberty to say. However, I'm really fond of the idea that crypto might be used for money laundering. However, it's not one of the major vehicles to do that. If I would be a bad actor, I wouldn't use crypto, because it's kind of easier to get caught if you use crypto for money laundering than using cash, for instance. So as I said, you've seen a lot. You've been in charge of the security and authentication for Coinbase. How is crypto used for money laundering? Is it used? Is it not? Is it that big of a narrative that it should be highlighted?
I mean, it was an interesting narrative a few years ago. I feel like it's died down recently, but
Well,
I mean, a few perspectives which you already touched upon. I mean, cash is much more common for money laundering. One, so like there's like most of the money laundering in the world happens through cash, and it's like that's you know, like nobody is trying to say cash is not good for other use cases. And then Bitcoin, or like at least the major networks, are actually very transparent. There's this real super interesting book, American Kingpin, I think. It's about you know, that like the Silk Road case, when how they caught him, and a lot of it was just like because they were using Bitcoin. So it's like it's not really great actually for not being caught. And you know, the book is super interesting. I would highly recommend. It's just like a amazing story how this person built a whole you know, just like dark web empire, and then how he got caught. And the third thing I would say is, like, you know, like a place like Coinbase is like probably the last place you would see this kind of activity, just because you know, it's all regulated. So like if you do anything that's suspicious, you do get reported to the relevant authorities. So like you know, a lot of, I mean, we would build software that would generate reports of, like, you know, transactions over a certain amount. You know, like if they have certain characteristics, you need to report them to the New York financial services, or to the U.S. government. Like, I mean, like this stuff gets reported. So you know, a regulated exchange is you know, one of the safest places, I guess. So we didn't see that much you know, illegal activity, just because it's like you wouldn't want to do it there. But yeah, fundamentally, I think it's just narrative. I mean, I think in general in crypto, like distinguishing between what's actually real and what's just the narrative, I think you know, that's a skill that's just really useful. You can just trust the
so to pick
narrative,
up
because I
the
think
facts from the noise. So I guess, and I
yeah,
hope
yeah.
this show will lead to a bit of that, and to be more clarifying. And I remember I just reread the Cyberpunk Manifesto that was written back in the 90s, and there was there a small part that said, if you wanted to buy a magazine, of all things, they said magazine, from a newsstand, and you use cash to buy it, the clerk is not going to ask you for details, who you are, what's your maiden name, and what's the provenance of the funds, and so on and so on. So this is the kind of things that we kind of need to actually provide when using crypto. Unless the transactions go over the counter, you still need to provide the anti-money laundering and all this know your customer, and to be compliant on those regulations. So that makes it a bit easier to track, and it's a bit invasive on privacy. So then my question to you would be, what's your take on privacy, and where is the line that you should actually draw on the sand when it comes to personal privacy and to being safe, right?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's a great question, because I don't think it's clear yet. You know, there's this whole like super interesting privacy technology, like you know, all these coins that are like Zcash or Monero.
Zero knowledge.
In general, like zero knowledge proofs are becoming more of a thing that's also super interesting, and it's something I'm actually looking at right now to learn more about. So I think, you know, technologically it feels like we're gonna have more privacy, and you know, I think at Coinbase they would talk about the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. So when the internet, you know, moved from just regular HTTP, which was plain text, to HTTPS, where you can do credit card payments and all of that, you know, so the thinking around that was that crypto will also go through a similar phase where, you know, things become more private, more secure, but we're not there yet. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's gonna be like, I think there's a lot of you know, I guess discussions with the government that need to happen, because like right now the transparency actually is good for catching a bunch of activity. Yeah, I think as these things become more common, like digital coins, governments do want to have some level of reporting and monitoring, and there's probably going to be a lot of tension around this. Like, I don't have a crystal ball on how it's going to play out.
Sure.
Is it going to end up being all private or some mix in between? But I think it's going to be a really interesting point of tension in the industry, is like, because yeah, after a while, if you go dark and nobody knows, it's similar with the encryption stuff that's happening in social media, right? Like more and more services are going encrypted, and
Like
there's a lot
Signal.
of concerns about that.
Like Signal, for instance, is a messaging
Yeah.
app.
Yeah, and WhatsApp is encrypted, and yeah, I mean, Facebook is doing a lot around encrypting everything.
So where do you think we are now in terms of crypto adoption? I know there are just a few 100 million crypto wallets out there. So how do you think about it? What have you seen so far? Are we on a path of going mainstream or not? Are we still early?
Super early, I would say. So there's three things I get excited about in crypto. So like, first, there's like just reinventing the financial system, making it more global, more just like a better financial system, more access to people. So I think that's maybe 5%, 10% done. Like I think maybe 100 million people in the world have crypto wallets. It's in the like low 100 million. It's not like a lot. So there's at least 10x more to go. And like DeFi and everything, that's even smaller, and it's growing. So like, just like general finance, 5 to 10%, I would say. And then we're finally seeing something that's not just finance, which is NFTs. It's the first direct finance application, right? Like, it's like collectibles, art. People are doing tickets with it, like lots of new use cases. So I would say that's maybe 1% ready. So like, basically, what are things you can do with crypto that are not purely finance? That's just like super early, but super interesting. Yeah, and then I think there will be, I'm a big believer in the Web3 vision as well, like that we will end up re-implementing a lot of these like Twitter or just building more decentralized services. But I think there we're at 0%. We don't have anything
IPFS,
that's really
instance,
working.
Like IPFS is one example that is part
Yeah,
of the
IPFS
Web3
is
ecosystem.
fundamental. I think that's a good example. Yeah.
So we're still very early. That's
Yeah, super early.
That's good to know. So we are at the right point to start building, right? I remember we've briefly touched on one of our previous conversations, private conversations on wealth management, and I just want to hear a few words from your side, because you have your roots now for at least 9 years in the US, in San Francisco, and your background or education, financial education, is kind of something that's made you learn how you can manage your assets, if you have any, or maybe you could give us some sort of example. How could you split your wealth if you have some sort of extra financial assets? How would you put the crypto? What bucket would be the crypto in? Maybe real estate, or maybe is real estate an option? Are stock options, what bonds, and so on and so on? How would you see it? And I just want to briefly touch this point, because I remember I got some nice info from you, and maybe you can reiterate it here. How would you split the wealth, and what would be your wealth management advice? Although we don't give financial advice here, maybe just this is not financial advice. However, how would you do it?
Yeah, so I've been reading a lot. Again, one of those things where you don't learn as a kid, and then as an adult, you're like, oh, I should have learned this way younger. How do you manage your money? I think it's pretty fundamental. But I guess it's like, so the main idea in finance is compounding, right? Like if things grow like let's say 5% per year, like you have a certain rate of you look over 10 years, and then if you start when you're, let's say, 30, and then like just multiple decades of compounding, your wealth keeps increasing. And then so you basically that's a key component, and you never want to make bets that you get fully wiped out, because that's what happens with a lot of people. Like you make a bet on just one thing, and then maybe
Never
you
go
lose
all
80%.
in, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like that's pretty important as well. So like my general model around this of thinking is like, I think about, okay, what's low risk? And in low risk is pretty much the stock market. So the US stock market historically doubles every 10 to 12 years. So let's say you invest $1,000 now, and then you wait 10 to 12 years, it should be worth $2,000, and then that happens roughly every decade. The global stock market moves a bit slower. So like US tends to be have higher growth, but also a bit more volatility. So you might want to look at that. In general, about real estate, my sense is like it's super hard, as in it's like I don't treat it as an investment. I treat it as if I want to, it's like a consumption thing. If I want to get a home, that's like I'm consuming. I'm not investing necessarily. I mean, I know there's people that make money from real estate. I just think it's very hard over multiple decades to do that well. It requires a lot of local knowledge. So you need to know, like this area in this particular place is going to be, it's going to grow a lot. And, you might know that for this year, but 10 years from now, you might not know. And then, it's not going to compound as much. So low risk, I would just say stocks. I mean, people used to do bonds, but those, like I mean, the yield was pretty negative around bonds. So that's my low risk bucket. And then on the high risk bucket, stuff like crypto, angel investing, venture capital, all of that is considered high risk. So like, for example, if you do invest in a venture fund, you would expect your money to triple in roughly 10 years. So if you invest $1,000, you get $3,000 back. So something like 20-30% per year, if you do the math of how much that ends up going. Because basically you can double it in the stock market, but then that's liquid, so you can sell it anytime. But then if you go on the venture side, it's illiquid, but then you get at least 3x. That's what a good fund should give you, at least 3x. So those are the edges. And then in the middle, you can, if you really think you have an edge, let's say you think, Tesla, Coinbase, whatever, like I'm a sophisticated investor, you not just 10 years, think about do you have an edge over like multiple decades? And most people don't. So index funds that just index the stock market tend to be really safe. And then high risk, I mean, like that's, I think it's a personal choice how much you put in high risk. You can put 0 in high risk, and that's great. Or you can put, 50% in high risk, and that's also, it ends up being a very personal perspective. Crypto is definitely high risk. So is tech investing.
I remember reading
framework.
on that's awesome, and thank you for this. I remember reading a piece on this from written by Fred Wilson, and he went actually through some tough times in the early 2000s in the .com bubble, and his takeaway was that you should manage your risk and be careful with what you bet on, because it's a kind of a gamble if you go to these higher risk investments. So thank you for pointing this out. I mean, I remember our talk, and I wanted to have it here too, because a lot of people ask what should we do, and here in this side of Europe, at least, it's quite often to think about real estate as a good investment. And unless you have an edge or you actually use the apartment or the house, then it might end up first of all illiquid, and then it might not happen as you want to, and in 10 years from now it could be actually seen as a bad investment. So it's a good takeaway. Thank you for this. So I wanted to ask you now about, you briefly mentioned NFTs, and it's right, the hot topic nowadays, and everyone tries to reinvent CryptoKitties and actually to play a bit with scarcity. I think that's at its core. NFTs are about scarcity, and crypto and Bitcoin especially is built around scarcity. And I think it's interesting to know your opinion on, is it a bubble or not? Is it maybe a new sort of asset? And could it be seen as an investment? Who is the typical buyer for an NFT piece? Is it a crypto flipper that wants to make a quick buck, or is it the real art aficionado that wants to, I don't know, extend its investment portfolio in art? So how would you see it nowadays?
I think so. It's like a bit of everything you said. That's the thing, because it's like with the reality of these situations is that it's messy, right? Like, it's not like a simple narrative of like, oh, it's a bubble, it's not a bubble, and I know that's how the media tries to
frame it,
like talk about these things, but it is just like that's just narrative around a very complex system. So I don't know if it's a bubble or not, but I don't think it matters that much. I mean, basically, it is something fundamentally new in the technology world, which is like having digital objects with scarcity. It was never possible before. I mean, it's like, the difference between me sending you, I don't know, an MP3, and then you have the same song, and then I don't know, like who's a good artist? I don't know, Dr. Dre making the first MP3, right? Like it's literally the first. You can see it on the blockchain, and that has humans have always placed value on these things. So it's like it's fundamentally new. I think it's super exciting. We're gonna see a lot of interesting use cases with it. Like tickets, and like there's been lots of exploration, and we might see some bubble dynamics as well. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting technology and consumer phenomena. So like literally people that didn't care about crypto. So right, like there's all these people that were like never heard of crypto before are now getting like MetaMask and buying NFTs because they want to have the first I don't know, the first object that some creator, right, like some artist or celebrity or whatever has put out. I mean, this is super exciting. It's just like you couldn't do this before. It's real demand. It's non-financial, as in is like it's there is a money aspect to it, but it's like it's fundamentally not people who are interested in crypto as a financial asset. Yeah, so super exciting, messy. I would definitely not try to put all my net worth in NFTs. That's probably not a good strategy.
So yeah, I think from what you just said is there's a takeaway that when things are the first MP3 from Dr. Dre or the first painting that goes on as to say on sale as an NFT from this and that artist, but this will fade away eventually. I mean, how many firsts can you have? And I think the question is, can it withstand the passage of time? Is it something that you see maybe still here in the next 5, 10, 20 years or not? And I think it will be still here. I think scarcity, as you mentioned, it's something important for us as humans. And maybe the hype around being the first at anything will fade away eventually, but the technology is here to stay. And how I would like to now touch on how this technology, especially blockchain technology, can be used and shall be used for doing good. I know you're a good person and you're very interested on these topics, on how to be environmentally friendly and sustainability and so on. How would you see some of the use cases of blockchain as a technology used for doing good?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, I mean, there's a few angles to it that I think about when it comes to crypto. And, even if, let me mention two of them. So one of them is like purely freedom. So imagine a world where there's more political chaos, more people who are like, we need to move from this region or this country. And it's like, how do you take all your assets with you or like all your wealth? Usually you don't, and people need to start from scratch, or they use gold. And like crypto now is like fundamental, like literally, let's say if there's some I don't know, like just making this up, but there's some anti-Romanian wave in the US, and I need to leave the US, I can literally just like memorize a private key, and then I can basically transfer all my wealth. And that's like, I think that's huge. It's going to allow a lot of just freedom for people from oppression, and just like, I think that's super super important. And the other one is just like giving financial services to everybody. So like if you're in the developing world, Africa, Asia, South America, right? Like it's not everybody gets access to a bank with a credit card with a person who you can go and say, hey, can you make this transfer for me? This is a very Western way of looking at it. Like Europe and the US have a lot of this infrastructure, but this is old school fundamentally, right? Like a bank, it's like it should be an app on a smartphone. Everybody has a smartphone or will have a smartphone. And then, I have a bank, I create wealth. And it's super important. Like there's places in, so with Novi, we're looking at all these developing countries, and there's the research shows stuff like women don't feel safe going to Western Union because they might get physically attacked and get their money stolen, right? Like, and that's a real thing that happens to people in the current system. And it's like, imagine if they just had a smartphone, they didn't have to go anywhere. It would just be all digital. They can even protect that from their, let's say they have an abusive husband or something like that. So it just like enables, access to financial services for
The unbanked.
billions of people. That's like, I think that's the ultimate vision. So even if we just do these two things well over the next few decades, I think it's gonna make the world, a bit better overall. So I'm really excited about just these two things, both of which are financial related.
Awesome. I would like to also highlight tracking of donations, and maybe in war zones or some sort of relief zones where you had some sort of earthquake, or I don't know, when you have to just send donations, there's a lot of corruption going on, and maybe a kind of blockchain system might help with traceability and tracking. I'm telling you this because we are working on something like that here in Romania. We have this app called Seva, which is tracking clothing item donations. And how about helping the climate change, or maybe moving towards a more sustainable planet? Is blockchain something that might help on that side or not? Because as you mentioned earlier, there's this narrative on Bitcoin is actually an NFT is worth, I don't know, a few $100s, but it spends in terms of electricity and so on a few thousand. Is maybe proof of stake system moving towards a more greener blockchain or not, or how would you see it?
Yeah, I think proof of stake, you got that right. I mean, I think proof of stake makes a difference. And even if proof of work for Bitcoin might be a long, I mean, even if Ethereum moves to proof of stake, Bitcoin unclear if it would ever move. But even if it's still around, I mean, our current banking infrastructure, like all the branches, all the people, all the commutes, I mean, that creates just as much pollution, if not more. So I'm not, fundamentally digitizing something is like way better on the environment. And again, there's some really interesting market dynamics around how energy, it's actually good in a lot of these regions to have these miners, because they provide just like more stability, like some revenue, like it's yeah, I think again, it's like I'm not particularly worried about the impact of crypto on climate. I think it's going to be net positive overall. But like climate itself seems like a much bigger problem than just crypto. Like
For
it's
now.
about transportation and energy and just like a lot of other things beyond crypto.
Right. So before moving maybe to one or two questions from our audience in Clubhouse, I would like to ask you, because I know you're an avid listener to podcasts and also a reader on all kinds of topics such as consciousness and awareness, meditation, and so on. What would be your recommendations for books or podcasts around crypto, blockchain, freedom, meditation, as I said, and consciousness? What would you recommend us to look at?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. Yeah, so I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I think on the meditation side, which is like my personal hobby, is like I got started by reading books from Sam Harris, who's like a secular philosopher. He has this great book, Waking Up. He has an app called Waking Up. It's a meditation app. The book is about meditation. I think that's a really great place to start. Because it's very secular. So like if you're more skeptical, I think it's very useful. And then on the crypto side, like I personally just try to keep up to date with everything Balaji does. Like usually they're not books, but he writes or has podcasts, and like he's usually at the he was the CTO of Coinbase, and he thinks about this stuff really deeply, like many years ahead of most people, I think. So, whenever he publishes something, I try to, like, he had one with Tim Ferriss recently that was really good. It's 3+ hours of just like how a very interesting perspective on the future. So that's where I would start for those.
And I know you just sent me a few days ago something on consciousness and a nice view on things. Maybe there's something on that topic too that you might recommend.
I think I sent you this video from this guy, Don Hoffman. It's a TED Talk. Yeah, like it's really interesting as well. It's like a very, like basically it's titled, I think, do we see reality as it is? And it talks about, how, a lot of what we consider reality might be more like an interface. And that's super cool. I mean, he has a whole book that I'm reading right now, but the TED Talk is again, a great place to start.
Awesome, thank you. So let's see if there's anyone in the Clubhouse room that wants to ask a question. Please raise your hand. If not, and before that happens, I would like to ask you if you plan on anything special for the future. So I know you're working on Novi Financial right now, or working on a next generation wallet, or to help the unbanked upgrade their digital finances. What's in there for the future for yourself, if you may reveal some of the plans, or haven't you looked that far yet?
Right now, I think I'm still trying to like understand how the future might play out. I feel like 2020 was a pivotal moment. I mean, it's basically this. I don't remember where I read this, but I think it's a great quote, which is this idea that finally the 21st century has started, and it just started last year. And I think so basically I'm like trying to understand where things are going and just get prepared for that. Yeah, like I'm also excited about Novi as a product. Looking forward to launching that. I think you'll hear more about that in the hopefully in the next few months, because that is the way that a lot of the developing world will get into crypto. So those are the two main things I'm thinking about right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I would like to follow up, maybe get you back on the show a few months or years from now, see from what we've said today, how much it happened, how much it didn't, and how it actually played out in terms of security, NFTs, and even the reality thing that you just mentioned. Are we living in a matrix or not? So thank you so much, Mircea.
Does it matter?
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
the simulation argument is like it doesn't really matter even if it's a simulation.
Right. So thank you one more time, Mircea, for joining us today. Thank you to our viewers. And as always, I would like to give a shout out to our sponsors, to Netopia Payments, for making this possible. And see you in a couple of weeks to our next show. And may you live long and prosper, right?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Always fun to chat.
Awesome. Cheers.